and left the supermarket with bags of groceries, hurrying home to prepare a festive dinner for her 40th birthday. Only close friends and their families were invited. Lost in thought, she stepped off the sidewalk into the parking lot and was suddenly knocked off her feet by a sharp push from behind. She fell, her bags tumbling onto the asphalt and scattering their contents, and she screamed in surprise and pain. "Excuse me, lady. For God's sake, I didn't see you. Where did you come from?" The frightened driver rushed to help her up, clearly upset by what had happened. "You almost ran over me. Who gives a license to people like you?" she exclaimed, rubbing her injured hand from the fall. "Well, you should have looked around," the stranger retorted, giving her a fiery look. The man lowered his tone. "I'm sorry, that was my fault. Let me take you home and get your groceries." As he began to collect the scattered items, and started to realize she was partly to blame for the accident. Softening her tone a bit, she admitted, "You're right. It's my fault. I was lost in thought. This is what happens. If you could give me a ride home, I'd appreciate it. My name's Matthew." He smiled and extended his hand. She smiled back as they headed home. Their conversation flowed easily. "Your husband is lucky. Such a beautiful, smart wife. I wasn't so lucky. My wife left me with a little daughter. That's how it goes, I guess. Do you have kids?" Anne's expression shifted at the question. It was a painful topic. After years of marriage, she had never been able to become a mother. She wasn't going to share that with a stranger, so she replied briefly, "No, we don't have children." When they arrived, the car stopped at a tall gate, behind which stood a large, beautiful house. "Thank you for the ride. Have a nice day," she said as she got out. "And I'm sorry if I offended you," Matthew said, noticing her discomfort, though he didn't understand why. "No, you're fine. Forgive me. I've been on edge lately. Thanks again." Once inside, Anne quickly unpacked the groceries and started preparing dinner. The table in the living room was set, and as time ticked down to the guest's arrival, she called her husband, but he didn't answer. A heavy sigh escaped her lips. Lately, he had been working late, often getting irritated over minor things, insisting he had a critical project. She had learned to adapt to his absence and live with it. The doorbell rang, and looking at the screen, she saw Gwen and Wes smiling. They had been friends since college and were probably the only close friends Anne and her husband had. Christopher preferred not to let outsiders into their lives, only allowing in friends from their youth. "And you look gorgeous. It's like you're forever 25, Gwen exclaimed admiringly. "Happy birthday, dear. This is for you." Wes handed her a beautiful bouquet. "Where's our hard worker? Is he not here yet?" Gwen asked. "Well, you know it's always urgent projects and meetings with Christopher," and replied, frowning. "I don't understand how you endure such a life. You're always alone. Maybe you should consider working. Wes is looking for a new specialist, and finding a good architect is as hard as finding a surgeon." Gwen sensed the oppressive atmosphere in Anne's home. "I'd love to, but you know Christopher is against it," and replied. "Forgive me for saying this, but Christopher is selfish. He's turned you into a housekeeper, only letting you exist on his terms," Gwen expressed. "Well, my dear friends, it's wonderful to see you both. Please, let's head to the table. I hope Christopher can join us soon," and said, trying to ease the tension as she led them to the festive table. After some time, when the group had eaten their fill and were reminiscing about their college days, Christopher finally returned home. He walked in with a serious expression, smiling at the guests more out of politeness than joy. "Christopher, you could have come home earlier. We haven't seen each other in so long, and it's your wife's birthday. Where are the flowers for the hostess and beloved woman?" Gwen couldn't help but speak up when she noticed Christopher enter empty-handed. "I'm glad to see you too, but work doesn't wait," he replied, showing everyone he didn't want to hear such remarks. "I didn't have time to pick up flowers. I was rushing. As you say, happy birthday." He handed her a gift box, his tone lacking enthusiasm. "Thank you, dear," and said, opening the box with a sad smile. Christopher never put much thought into getting her a gift. Jewelry was his usual fallback, and this year was no exception. The atmosphere at the table lightened a bit with Christopher's arrival, but constant interruptions from his mobile phone soon broke the evening's flow. After saying goodbye to Anne and Christopher, their friends left the big house, and silence fell once more. As Anne began to clean up, she noticed Christopher was still absorbed in his phone. Once the cleaning was done, she turned to him. "Christopher, don't you think that even when you're home, you're still far away? Lost in your thoughts?" "Don't nitpick. I'm working," he replied curtly. Understanding the hint, she silently walked to the bedroom, tears welling up in her eyes. Once inside, she let herself cry. Despite being married, she felt incredibly lonely and unwanted. Her father had passed away when she was young, and her relationship with her stepfather had never been strong. Thankfully, Anne's friends had always been there for her. Without them, she would have felt completely isolated. She remembered her conversations with them and seriously considered the idea of starting work. It might help her feel productive and less alone. The next morning, Anne woke up early and noticed Christopher wasn't beside her. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Something was off. Peeking into the slightly open door of his study, she saw Christopher asleep on the couch, hidden under a jacket. Her heart raced. Something was definitely wrong with him and their family. After taking a shower and getting ready, she went downstairs to find Christopher sitting in a chair, staring out at the landscape beyond the window with a cup of coffee in hand. He didn't notice her at first, and when she greeted him, he jumped in surprise. "You've been acting strange lately. Are you okay? Did you sleep in the office? Are you avoiding me? What's going on?" She bombarded him with the questions that had been nagging her. "We need to talk," Christopher said, his tone calm. "Yes, I wanted to talk too. I know you'll disagree, but I've decided to start working. I've fallen in love with another woman. She's pregnant, and we're expecting a child," he replied in a disturbingly matter-of-fact tone, and felt her vision blur and swayed, barely able to stand. "How long has this been going on?" was all she could manage to ask. "Does it matter? I found out about the pregnancy yesterday. If it's that important to you, thank you for not ruining my birthday," and whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Let's not have hysterics," Christopher replied, indifferent to her tears. "Do you even care about my feelings? What do you care about mine? I'm 40 years old, and all my friends have kids. What do we have?" she exclaimed, her voice rising in frustration. "How dare you blame me for not having children? You know how much I've gone through and how many doctors I've seen. Stop this spectacle. Why all the tragedy? Thousands of people get divorced and move on. Understand? I'll soon have a son, and I'll finally be happy. We'll discuss the divorce details tonight when I come back." With that, Christopher left, slamming the door behind him, and collapsed on the floor, crying from pain and humiliation. Meanwhile, Christopher decided to visit his mistress, Ellen, to let her know he had confessed everything to and that a divorce was imminent. He planned to formalize his relationship with Ellen afterward. Using his key, he opened the door to the apartment he rented for Ellen, surprised to find her packing a large suitcase. "I'm home. Why isn't anyone greeting me? What's going on? Are we going somewhere?" he asked with a smile. Ellen looked up in surprise. "Oh, hi, darling. I didn't expect you so soon," she said. "So, are we going somewhere?" he asked, twirling her in his arms. "Yes, we're going to your beautiful country house, where your wife is living it up. Well, she has nowhere else to go for now. I have to buy her an apartment. I can't just throw her out on the street," Christopher explained, frowning at Ellen. "I don't want to understand anything. We're a family now. There are almost 3 of us crammed into this tiny apartment while she enjoys her life in that big house. Our baby needs fresh air, and we're stuck here breathing this polluted air," Ellen said, almost in tears as she gently stroked her stomach for emphasis. "You're probably right. Don't upset our son," Christopher said, feeling the weight of her words. After he left, Ellen sat on the couch, stunned by the betrayal and unable to gather her thoughts. She couldn't believe this was real. It felt like a cruel joke. Christopher will come back and say it's all a prank, she whispered to herself, repeating the words like a mantra. Just then, her phone rang, making her jump. She didn't want to talk to anyone, but as she wiped her tears, she looked at the screen. Her heart raced. It was Christopher. She swiped to answer, but the knot in her throat prevented her from saying a word. Are you there? You don't have to say anything. Listen, I found you an apartment. You need to take a look at it, Christopher said, but didn't bother to engage in his delusional talk and simply hung up. She believed these matters should be discussed face to face, not over the phone. Pouring herself a cup of herbal tea, she settled onto the cozy terrace of their home. She loved this house deeply. They had bought it together when they were young, investing their hearts into it and gradually building their lives. And now, Christopher acted as if none of that mattered, as if their years together had never happened. Scoundrel, she hissed aloud, wiping away her tears. She tried to pull herself together, but the happy moments of their married life kept surfacing in her mind, haunting her, and felt broken, seriously considering whether she should continue living with emptiness and loneliness. Evening fell unnoticed as she remained lost in thought, not even realizing when her husband returned home. Christopher found her and immediately launched into a serious discussion. What was that? You hung up the phone and ignored my calls. We're adults. Let's part peacefully. I'm not holding you back. What do you mean? I don't understand. You're not holding me back. Then go to your mistress. I'm not vacating my home for her. If it comes to it, we can sell it and split the money. That seems fair. And this house is actually under my mother's name, remember? And it's mortgaged. It can't be sold. Now I understand why you insisted on putting the house in your mother's name. You covered your tracks well. I sold my apartment years ago and invested everything I had in this place. I remember everything, which is why I'm telling you that I found you an apartment. You need to see it, and then we can finalize the divorce. Well, fine. Live here, but know that you'll have to answer for everything in this life. You will definitely pay for the pain you caused me. The next day, she reluctantly went to see the apartment Christopher had found for her. Along the way, memories flooded back of how happy they had once been and how hard they'd worked to create a life together. She had sacrificed her own career to support him, assisting with complex projects. Now, she couldn't understand how he could so easily find a replacement. The main reason they were at this divorce stage was the absence of children, a painful topic. How many times had she visited the best doctors? How many pills had she taken? How many injections had she endured? All in vain. Doctors shrugged, unable to explain why, after all these years, they had no children. Although Christopher never directly blamed her, it pained her to hear him talk about Ellen and their growing son. Lost in thought, she realized she had arrived at the entrance of her new apartment. On the 5th floor, it was quite spacious and bright. It couldn't compare to their house, but it was suitable for comfortable living. Where did it all go wrong? She muttered to herself. The next day, her suitcases were almost packed. She took only what belonged to her and looked back at her home one last time. Alas, she never found true happiness there. Christopher, what is she doing here? A voice called out behind her. Turning, she saw a young girl, at least 20 years her junior, standing there, beautiful, confident, and reminiscent of Christopher. A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to run away, but steadied herself and replied calmly, I'm still in my own home, darling. And by the way, I am still your lover's lawful wife. As for you being here, that's a good question. No shame, no conscience. Where do you all come from? Disgusting people. She turned to Christopher. I thought I made it clear your mistress shouldn't be here when I left. She's not a mistress. She's the mother of my son. Stop the hysterics. It won't lead us anywhere. Modern people indeed, and said with a bitter laugh. You've never understood people, Christopher, and you're mistaken now. Look at her. There's a desperate look on her face. I bet she's searching for a rich daddy. Christopher frowned, but remained silent as Ellen rolled her eyes theatrically and began to lightly touch her still flat stomach. "Girl, what's your name?" and asked mockingly. "Dear Christopher, this girl is a natural actress. I'm sure the surprises in your life are just beginning." Suddenly, a notification pinged on her phone, and she breathed a sigh of relief. The taxi had arrived at the gates to take her 2 large suitcases. She rolled them toward the exit, while Christopher watched her leave, sadness gnawing at his heart. Something felt wrong deep in his soul, and for a fleeting moment, he wanted to stop this madness that had overtaken their lives. Ellen quickly resumed her role, sensing something was amiss, and tried to redirect Christopher's attention to herself. "Christopher, my dear, something hurts badly in my lower abdomen," she complained. He snapped back to reality. "Don't worry, my love. Just rest and stay quiet like the doctor said. Remember?" He gently guided her down, holding her waist, and they left the walls of Anne's once beloved home, clinging to the last threads of her dignity. It was unbearable for Anne to witness the woman who had shattered their family receiving such tenderness and care from her husband. What awaited her in the future? She was too afraid to imagine. In the taxi, she let her tears flow freely. The driver glanced at her sympathetically in the rearview mirror and finally asked, "Are you okay? Can I help you with something?" "I'm sorry. I just couldn't hold back my emotions. My husband brought his pregnant mistress into our home. That's all." And replied, sorrow evident in her voice, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You know, I'm not certain a beautiful woman like her can be replaced." "What a fool your husband is," the driver said. "Well, where is that beauty now? I'm already 40. He found himself a young girl," she sighed. "Dear woman, you're only 40. It's the perfect time to love, live, and thrive. As for those young people, they've got nothing but wind in their heads. What good is their youth? Trust me, I'm 67. As an experienced man, I can tell you everything will be fine for you. When the time comes, your husband may even come back. But will you need him then? It may seem like the end of the world now, but believe me, soon you'll look back on this with indifference. You might even laugh about it," and felt truly grateful to this kind stranger for his support and words of wisdom. Listening to him, a flicker of hope began to blossom in her heart. In the first months of her new life, Anne was busy arranging her apartment. It was spacious and comfortable, but it couldn't compare to the cozy home where she had spent so many years. Perhaps she would have gone mad from loneliness and sad memories if it weren't for her childhood friends, Gwen and Wes, who did their best to support her. Wes offered Anne a job at his company without hesitation. Slowly, she settled into her new work environment, where the team welcomed her warmly. When she received her first paycheck in years, her joy knew no bounds. Gwen became a frequent visitor, while Christopher, for his part, stopped contacting Anne altogether. He called once to check on her after learning what had happened, but did not support his friend's betrayal. One night, he stayed late at work, consumed by an urgent project that needed finishing for a client. Wes was desperate, fearing their company would fail the project and the client would go to a competitor. But Anne, recalling everything she had learned at university, rolled up her sleeves and worked hard to turn things around. After finishing the project, she left it on Wes's desk and stepped out into the damp, cold air. The piercing wind cut through her coat, making her shiver. "Oh, I should have called a taxi earlier," she scolded herself aloud, glancing around. She spotted the headlights of a parked car across the street. The road was empty, so she decided to take a shortcut, resolutely moving to cross the 4 lanes of traffic. But just as she stepped onto the road, a car rounded the corner, its headlights blinding her. She heard the screech of brakes and stumbled in fright. "What's wrong with you? Are you trying to get killed?" A man's voice called out as he exited the car. "It's you who's crazy. Watch where you're driving," and snapped, fully aware she was in the wrong. "Oh, it's you again. came a mocking male voice that sounded familiar. The headlights still blinded her, obscuring the driver's face. "Let me help you up." "Thanks, but I've already been helped. My knees and hands are bruised. Tomorrow is important. I have to present the project to the client, and you've ruined everything for me." "What will they think?" "You should tell them the truth. You're a reckless person who often throws herself under cars," the driver retorted. "You're a bore," she replied, rolling her eyes. "You're right. That's exactly who I am. Anyway, get in the car. I'll take you home, or at least off the road." "I'm in a hurry." "Fine, just take me home. It's your responsibility for nearly hitting me." She quickly got up from the wet asphalt and plopped down in the passenger seat. When the driver turned to her, she exclaimed in surprise, "You're Matthew, if I remember correctly." "Yes, that's me. I recognized you right away," Matthew said, chuckling. What a coincidence that she nearly got run over by the same car just a few months ago. "Well, I remember where to take you," he added with a smile. Ellen managed a sad smile in return. "A lot has changed in my life. I have a new address now." "Are you living in the new apartment buildings near the South Bridge?" "Yes, I am." "So it turns out we're neighbors now," Matthew replied, grinning. "Excuse my curiosity, but why did you move from a house to an apartment?" "My daughter and I dream of moving into a house. The air is cleaner there." "I divorced my husband," she said, her voice heavy. "He bought me this apartment, so I moved. That's the story." "I'm sorry, but if I remember correctly, you had a happy family not too long ago." "It's all quite banal, really. I couldn't have children with my husband, but his mistress got pregnant. Now they're living in my house, enjoying life while I'm here in this apartment." "Satisfied your curiosity? Let's keep quiet now. I have an important day at work tomorrow." "I'm sorry, Anne. I didn't realize," Matthew said, falling silent for the rest of the journey. When they arrived, he smiled. "So, we're neighbors. I live across the street. I hope this isn't the last time we meet, though perhaps under better circumstances." "Thank you for the ride," she replied, stepping out. That night, she found it hard to sleep, her thoughts drifting between the project she had worked so hard on and Matthew. He was handsome, and being with him felt easy and uncomplicated. She couldn't help but hope they would meet again, under more pleasant circumstances. The next morning, barely opening her eyes, and glanced at the clock and felt a surge of panic. "Oh no, not today." She rushed around her apartment, trying to get ready as quickly as possible. Within 10 minutes, she was dressed, had touched up her makeup, and tied her long hair into a tight bun. She cursed herself for not calling a taxi in advance, now wasting precious time waiting for a ride. "Good morning, neighbor," a familiar voice called from behind her. She turned around and breathed a sigh of relief. "Matthew, help me. I'm late for an important meeting." She sprinted toward the car where he was waiting. "I was working late on a project, and it's critical for my future and the company's reputation. The boss says the client is very picky, and only I know the nuances of the project's execution. I need to convince them it's the right fit." "Well, how can I refuse a beautiful woman? I'm in a hurry for an important meeting, too." "It's not far from here." "Where?" "You almost hit me yesterday, remember?" she pleaded, noting how he admired her natural beauty with minimal makeup. "I agree, but I have one condition. We'll have lunch together sometime." "Matthew, anything you want. Let's go." As they drove up to the office, they jumped out of the car and hurried inside. Matthew smiled at her, still puzzled by how a man could let such a woman slip from his life. After parking, Matthew headed toward the same office building. Meanwhile, Anne rushed in, panting. "Phew, I made it just in time. Wes, have you looked at the project?" "I did everything I could, and even more. There were some questions about the construction by the river, and I solved the flooding issue," she explained, grabbing a pencil from Wes's desk and demonstrating her solution on the unfolded drawings. Wes stared at her in awe. "And you're a miracle. You did in one evening what my best specialists couldn't even think of. The client will be here any minute, and all my hope is on you for the presentation." "Don't worry. I'll do everything at the highest level, and assured him. Just then, she heard a familiar voice behind her. Matthew, what are you doing here? She turned around in surprise. What a pleasant surprise, Anne. I suppose I'm the picky client who kept you working late last night, Matthew said, smiling. Wes, initially tense, felt relief wash over him at the friendly atmosphere. Good day, Mr. Foy. Good day. So you two know each other? I see you're neighbors. Wes extended his hand. Yes, we are. I'm sure I'll love everything in the project. Let's move on to the presentation, Matthew said. The negotiations unfolded in a pleasant atmosphere. Matthew was impressed by Anne's professionalism. To be honest, I approached another company with a similar request, but their project turned out to be a disaster. They couldn't address the seasonal flooding. But you nailed it. It's not just my merit. Our whole team has been working hard on this project, she replied, a little embarrassed. Il y a everything on the. I'd like to invite you to our site where the house will eventually be built. I also wanted to discuss some details. Does tomorrow work for you? Matthew asked, and felt her cheeks flush as she glanced at him. Well, you certainly have a great rapport with the client. Congratulations. It looks like you'll be leading this project to the end. She couldn't help but smile, feeling buoyed by the positive developments in her life. With each passing day, her mood brightened. She found herself thinking less about her ex-husband, who had betrayed her, and more about Matthew. His admiration for her didn't go unnoticed, and it seemed he genuinely wished her happiness as he entrusted her with this project, fully aware of how crucial it was for her. As the workday came to a close and stepped out of the office, scanning her surroundings. For some reason, she felt like Matthew was nearby. What are you looking for? Anne, are you 20 years old? She muttered to herself, rolling her eyes as she made her way to the designated crosswalk. She arrived at the entrance, feeling irked by her own impatience. When Matthew finally appeared, she couldn't hold back her frustration. Hello, Matthew. I've been waiting for you in the rain for half an hour. Hello. I'm so sorry. My daughter got sick. Her temperature spiked overnight. I didn't have your number, so I couldn't warn you that it was canceled. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Matthew, she said, guilt washing over her. Is there anything I can do to help? I really need your help. I don't want to leave her alone. I need to go to the pharmacy. How about this? You go home, and I'll go to the pharmacy. Write down my number. If you need anything else, just call me anytime. I'll always be there to help. Of course. Just tell me your apartment number. I'll quickly buy everything and bring it over. Thank you. You're really coming through for me, he replied gratefully. 15 minutes later, Matthew returned from the store with a bag full of fruit and medicine. Take off your coat and come in, please. Eva's fallen asleep. I made some tea. You're all wet, and I don't want you to catch a cold because of me. Thanks, and said softly, following him into the kitchen. To her surprise, the atmosphere in Matthew's apartment was modest. Given the significant funds required for his project, she had expected something different. Yet, the state of his home suggested that he wasn't particularly wealthy. Over tea, they shared stories, including details about his daughter, Ava, who was just 5 years old. She was born healthy, but a month later, doctors diagnosed her with a congenital heart defect. When she turned 1, they performed a successful operation, and she recovered quickly. But then she had her first asthma attack a year later. I've done everything I can for her, but no one has been able to cure her completely. The only thing doctors recommend is getting her out of the city more often and changing her environment. Fresh, clean air could do wonders for her health. That's why I thought building a house now is the right move. The only problem is that the house will be right by the river. You're the only one who could solve that problem, and said, intrigued. Please excuse my curiosity, but what do you do? Where do you work? It must be tough raising a daughter alone. You're both mom and dad to her. It is difficult at times, especially when Ava is sick. I worry so much. When she's well, I take her to daycare and go to work. I'm a mechanic at a technical service station. How do you manage to juggle everything? I've gotten used to it. I can't afford not to handle everything myself. There's no one else to care for Ava. We do our best together. Now, we're eagerly awaiting the start of construction on our dream home. I hope once it's finished, life will get easier. A childhood friend of mine built a sawmill not far from my plot. He says he really needs me as a good woodsman. Wow, do you understand that kind of work? And asked, surprised. Of course. My father did it all his life. We even had a profitable wood processing business, but after my mother died, my father met another woman and sold everything. I never considered returning to that business. I just wanted to leave for the city. He gave me a substantial sum from the sale, and I graduated from agricultural college. I know a lot about forestry. I became a mechanic because that profession wasn't in demand in the city. But I make good money, enough for Eva and me. I still plan to leave the city and pursue what I love, Matthew said, and then listened with admiration. She had never met anyone so genuine and straightforward aside from Gwen. Matthew shared his aspirations for the future, revealing so much about himself. His humor, his simplicity, and the way he communicated with care and attention captivated her. What stood out most were his sincere eyes and warm smile. They were so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't notice Eva entering the kitchen. "Daddy, who is this lady?" Eva asked. "Sweetheart, how are you feeling?" Matthew smiled, turning to his daughter. "Come here. I want to introduce you to my friend. This is Anne. She lives next door and came to help us as soon as she found out you were sick." "Hello, Anne. I'm Eva. It's very nice to meet you." "It's a pleasure to meet you too, Eva. You're such a cute and beautiful girl." Anne replied, looking at her with curiosity. "Are you also very beautiful? Do you have a daughter?" "Unfortunately, no, but I would love to have a smart daughter like you," and said sincerely. "Well, if you both agree, I suggest we order pizza and watch a fun movie. We have an unplanned day off tomorrow anyway," Matthew proposed. Eva clapped her hands with delight and hugged them both. "Hooray! Can join us." Matthew turned to Anne, his eyes hopeful. "Would you be up for it?" "Well, if you'll accept me into your little team, I'd be happy to join you," Anne replied, gently stroking Eva's unruly curls. The girl leaned against her, resting her head on Anne's shoulder, and she was touched by the child's warmth and sincerity. From that day forward, a genuine friendship blossomed between Anne and Matthew, with Eva thrilled to have Anne as a frequent guest in their home. They enjoyed each other's company, playing board games, watching educational films about animals, and often visiting amusement parks and zoos. After months together, Anne could no longer imagine her life without Matthew and Eva, just as they couldn't envision theirs without her. The construction of their house was progressing rapidly, and West entrusted Anne with another complex project, which she handled brilliantly. The employees now consulted her on challenging matters, and she never hesitated to lend a hand. One day, when Wes came into the office, he was acting differently than usual, and noticed and decided to find out what was bothering him. "May I come in? I brought you some coffee," she said, knocking gently on the door with a cup in her hand. "Hello. Come in, of course. You're always welcome," Wes smiled. "Is something wrong? You seem upset." "Yes, you're right. Something did happen," he replied, his brow furrowing. "Remember Christopher? He lent me some money. Well, he's been having some issues with his business, and Ellen gave birth to a son. He's demanding the money back sooner than expected. And there's more. He told me to inform you that he can't pay for the apartment you live in anymore. He has his own family now." "Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. I had no idea the property was bought on credit. But Christopher promised he'd pay regularly. Once again, I believed him, and he cheated me," and said, frustration bubbling to the surface. "I'll pay back my debt within a week. I just can't understand how he could do this after everything we shared. I sold my apartment and invested every penny into the house he now lives in with another woman. I wanted to hit him hard, but this coward refused to meet with me. He said I should just deposit the money into his account. Since I supported you, he said we had nothing more to discuss, Wes said, shaking his head. Wes, I'll manage. The apartment is in my name. I earn good money, and I have a wonderful boss. I'll pay off the loan myself. I've learned a valuable lesson here. I was foolish and young, not thinking it would end like this. But now he has a son. You know, Christopher always wanted children. He should think about his future now, and replied, a touch of sadness in her voice. Oh, come on. Do you still feel pity for him after everything he's done? Wes asked, incredulous. And you're not alone in this. Gwen and I will help you. Our company's reputation has grown thanks to your efforts. That's why I've decided to give you a well-deserved raise. Thank you, Wes. May I leave early today? Everything's done at work. I want to stop by the store on my way home. Today is my birthday, and Matthew and I have already picked out a gift. We just need to pick it up. Why, you picked out a gift with Matthew? Is this serious? Wes asked, raising an eyebrow. I think I should trust fate if it's giving me a second chance. Matthew is a wonderful person, and Eva is such a delightful girl. They brought me back to life and said, her eyes sparkling, your eyes are glowing, and don't miss this chance for happiness. Trust fate. You're right. Thank you for being here for me, Wes. Without you and Gwen, I think I would have gone mad from loneliness. A year passed, and the transformation was remarkable. Well, everyone, you've done an impressive job. Your house is simply amazing. You've calculated everything perfectly with the river. No flood can harm it, Wes said, admiring the view from the terrace overlooking the water. When are you planning to move in? He asked. Probably when the time is right, and replied, rubbing her round belly as she looked at Matthew with eyes full of happiness. He embraced her, gently kissing her cheek. We have a little more to do. The workers are finishing up inside the house, and after that we're set. And I have decided to stay in the city until the baby is born. Then we'll think about moving, Matthew explained. Great job, everyone. I'm thrilled for your new family, Wes said with genuine enthusiasm. Oh, Wes, I never imagined a person could be this happy, Matthew replied, a smile spreading across his face. You're a shining example, my friend. Don't hesitate to ask for help. I'll always be here for you. Anne's family is my family. That's our rule. Thank you, Wes. I really appreciate it. I'll definitely need help because I've decided to dive into woodworking. It feels like I'm finally in my element, Matthew said, excitement sparkling in his eyes. Is that so? You're planning to set up production locally? Wes asked, intrigued. Absolutely. But don't even think for a second that I'll let you go, Matthew joked, laughter in his voice. Neither will I. You and Gwen have done so much for me. I'll always remember your kindness and cherish our friendship. Plus, I love my work. Money will be a blessing right now. All right, enough about business. Let's go see Gwen and the kids. They're probably missing us. When they returned home, they found the children playing with a ball while Gwen set the table, having prepared a treat in advance. At that moment, Anne's life was steadily improving. The apartment issues had been resolved thanks to a lawyer hired by Wes, and with her good salary, she diligently paid off the mortgage on her property. 6 months after they met and married Matthew, and Eva was thrilled to have a mom like all her friends. They developed a warm, trusting friendship that many girls would envy. Matthew adored his wife and valued her contributions to raising Eva. Eva was excited about the prospect of having a brother or sister, and together they went shopping for baby items, unable to imagine life without Matthew and Eva. One day, when Matthew went out of town for a planned appointment and had a checkup at the woman's clinic, Gwen kindly agreed to stay with Eva, especially since her son Tommy was eager to play with his new friend again, and left the doctor's office in high spirits. The baby was developing well, the heartbeat was strong, and no complications had been detected despite her age. As she left the clinic, she decided to stop by the mall to look for toys for Eva and Tommy. However, An unwelcome surprise awaited her there. She came face to face with her ex-husband, Christopher, who froze upon seeing her pregnant belly. "How is this possible?" "Yes, my wife didn't grieve for long," he stammered, struggling to comprehend the situation. "Hello, Christopher. This isn't your business. I heard your son was born. Congratulations. I would say it's good to see you, but it's not. I need to go. Goodbye." With that, she continued on her way, leaving Christopher standing in shock, watching her leave. When he returned home, his little son ran to greet him, while Ellen sat on the couch, engrossed in her phone. "Hi, Ellen. Are we going to have dinner?" Christopher asked from the doorway. Ellen shot him a dissatisfied look. "I asked you to transfer money to my card." "Did you forget?" she replied, ignoring his question. "Ellen, is that all you want to say? You've been acting strange lately. Is everything okay with you?" "I'm not acting strange, Christopher. I just don't like it when you ignore my requests. This is more of a demand than a request. I'm having difficulties at work. We need to be smart with our money, not like you're used to. You were once married to someone who managed money wisely. And how did that end? I need to update my wardrobe. I don't want to look like a slob like her." "Shut up. Don't you dare talk about and like that. You're not worth her little finger. If it weren't for our son." Christopher's words trailed off as he headed to the playroom with the baby. Realizing she had gone too far, Ellen retreated to the kitchen to prepare something for dinner. Christopher tried to calm himself, focusing on his son, but the 2-year-old's words left doubts in his mind. The little boy shared stories about his day, telling his father in his childlike way about the ice cream they had and how he had played with his uncle. That night, Christopher postponed the uncomfortable conversation with his wife, but casually asked what they had been doing all day. Ellen replied vaguely that they had just stayed home. As Christopher lay in bed, he couldn't shake the thoughts swirling in his head. He noted how good Ellen still looked and how well pregnancy suited her. The idea of his ex-wife being happy with someone else gnawed at him, fueling a wave of unwarranted jealousy. The next day, Christopher went to work as usual, but before leaving the house, he told Ellen, "I sent you the money you asked for. So, update your wardrobe." Upon hearing this, Ellen's face lit up and she jumped into his arms. "Thank you. I love you, my dear. See you tonight." Christopher gently pushed her aside and left the house. Instead of going to work that day, he decided to follow Ellen to see if she truly would go shopping with their son. What he discovered was far from what he expected. As soon as Ellen left with their son, Christopher discreetly followed her, driving cautiously to avoid detection. Alarm bells rang in his head when he noticed her heading toward a residential area of the city, where she parked in front of a 10-story building, scooped up their son, and walked inside. Christopher waited patiently for Ellen to emerge, but it wasn't until closer to evening that she finally left someone else's house, a young man carrying their son on his shoulders. Anger simmered just beneath the surface, but Christopher remained hidden, determined to uncover the truth that haunted him. Meanwhile, Matthew and had finished building their dream home and planned to spend the weekend there with their friends Wes and Gwen. "I need to run to my apartment for a moment to water the flowers. We won't be here for a few days. Can you manage?" Matthew asked. "Of course, my love. I'll take Eva with me. We'll do it quickly," and replied. Together, they went to the apartment, where Eva diligently watered the flowers, humming a cheerful tune. Suddenly, a knock on the door caught Anne's attention. "It's probably Daddy. Please open the door, sweetheart, but first ask who's there," and instructed. "Okay, Mom," Eva replied, rushing to the door. When she asked who was there and heard a familiar voice, she immediately called for her mother, and peered through the peephole and was taken aback to see Christopher standing there. "What are you doing here?" she asked, opening the door slightly. "We need to talk. I've been a fool. Please forgive me and let's start over," he pleaded, desperation evident in his eyes, and glanced down at Eva, then smiled gently. "Eva, why don't you check if we watered all the flowers together? I need to talk to this person for a few minutes." Eva nodded and scampered off into another room. Christopher, are you out of your mind? I have a different life now. I'm expecting a child with someone I love, and replied, her tone firm. Once upon a time, you said you were finally happy that you were about to have a son. Remember? Well, now I understand what you meant, Christopher said, his voice trembling. I'm finally happy too. I have a daughter and another child on the way. I don't love you anymore. I let you go long ago. I know you can't. I was a fool. I'm divorcing Ellen. She lied to me from the very beginning. She was only with me for my money. My son, he isn't mine. It's a long story, but I did a DNA test. Ellen gave birth to a son by another man. And while I wasn't home, she was with the boy's biological father. I'm all alone now. Please forgive me and come back home. I'll love your child as my own. I'll be lost without you. And shook her head. Now you understand how I felt when you betrayed me. Let's be honest, Christopher. I was a faithful wife. I never cheated on you. You destroyed everything yourself. The fact we didn't have children is not my fault. Christopher, you got what you deserved, and it came back to you like a boomerang. Leave and never come back here again. I will never return to you. Despair washed over Christopher. Just then, Matthew emerged from the other room, having unintentionally overheard the conversation. Dear, you and Eva were gone for a long time. I thought I'd check on you, he said, his gaze narrowing at Christopher. What are you doing here? I bought this apartment. I have rights, Christopher replied defiantly. Rights? You're a coward. This apartment belongs to my wife, and only to her. Have you forgotten what it means to be a man? Do you dare to claim anything here? Matthew interrupted sharply. Christopher, it's better for you to leave. It's over, and added firmly. Tears began to roll down Christopher's cheeks as the weight of his mistakes settled in. He turned slowly to leave, but not before uttering, "Forgive me," and then glanced at Matthew. Take care of her. There's no one like her in this world. Don't worry. I won't miss my chance at happiness, Matthew replied coldly, closing the door behind Christopher as he stepped out. Are you okay? Matthew asked, turning back to Anne. Yes, everything is fine, she answered, closing her eyes with relief in her husband's embrace, holding Eva close. It's time for us, my love, she called to the little girl, and together they headed home. As the happy family left the building, they were unaware that Christopher sat alone in his car across the street, gripping the steering wheel tightly, watching them disappear from view. He knew he had lost, and for good. 3 years passed, and a joyful group gathered by the river, soaking in the sun in a cozy corner of paradise. Matthew and Wes were busy at the barbecue, while Tommy helped Eva teach her younger brother to ride a tricycle. And then Gwen relaxed on soft loungers by the riverbank. I look at my family and can't believe how happy I am, Gwen. It's terrifying to think how I would have lived without them. Oh, and it couldn't have been any other way. You deserve this happiness. I must admit, I envy you, though in a good way, Gwen said, smiling. Every day spent together feels like a honeymoon. Matthew loves you so much. He would move mountains for you, Gwen added. Yes, you're right. It's like I've sprouted wings. Matthew is a remarkable man. He's set up his production, and business is booming. By the way, I'm almost finished with the plans for your dream house, so we'll be living nearby and seeing each other more often, and replied joyfully. Girls, the meat is ready. Let's eat while it's hot, Matthew called out, watching the approaching women with admiration. He couldn't help but feel grateful for the wonderful people in his life. Matthew, we're so lucky to have you, and said, her heart full. He turned and smiled at the beautiful, cheerful women before him, thanking fate for every twist and turn that led him here. He realized now what a real family felt like, the joy and love that filled their lives, and reflected on how her life had transformed from being abandoned and betrayed to discovering true happiness. Nothing happens without reason, she thought. Every encounter holds significance, And recognizing the signs of fate is vital to embracing the happiness that comes your way. Watching Matthew play with the children, their laughter ringing through the air, she thanked God for the chance at a joyful and carefree future. She felt loved and knew, without a doubt, that life could begin anew, even at 40.